feel like slagging off my favourite books might not be the best advertisement. Hi folks, Harry here, and today I'm going to be talking about things I dislike in some of my favourite books. So when it comes to my favourite books, I can definitely identify things that are wrong with them. I do believe it becomes a problem when you love something to the extent where you can't identify any of its flaws. So I do think it is very important to acknowledge our favourite book's faults. No book is perfect, no matter how much you love a book. So today I'm just going to be discussing some aspects of some of my favourite books that I'm not too keen on. So the first book that I'm going to be talking about is Misery by Stephen King. This is my favourite book of all time. And you're probably thinking, Harry, you talk about this book every single day. What is there about it that you can't like? Well, let me tell you. There are parts of this book that are kind of injected with what the main character is writing, and it's really not necessary to the story, and it does drag it out at times. It does make it feel
very, very slow.
This is the main flaw that I find within this book. It does just make it very, very slow at some times. But other than that, it's a fantastic book, and it is my favourite book for a reason. Sticking with the topic of Stephen King books, I'm going to talk about The Shining next. So I've tried to get plenty of my friends to read The Shining, and they basically all say the same thing.
It's way too slow.
And in a way, I do agree. I think that the first 100, maybe 200 pages of this book are extremely slow-paced. But after that, this book speeds up, and it is just a thrilling ghost tale and a fantastic depiction of a deteriorating psyche, and that's why I love this book so much. So dear all of my friends who have never finished this book because it has a slow opening, you need to finish it, because I promise you, this is one of the most fantastic books you will ever read in your life. The last Stephen King book that I want to talk about today is going to be It. So It has a lot of problems. So as much as I love it, I can definitely tell that there's some stuff wrong with it. So not only does this book have
extremely slow pacing
because of the over 1,000 page long length, but it also has a very, very, very problematic, very illegal, very wrong scene that probably just shouldn't exist. If you've read this book, then you know exactly what I'm talking about, but I'm not going to tell you what it is for any of you that haven't read this book, because I do not want to put this image in your brain, but it happens in this book and it is not great. I really do wish that some editions of It should be printed without this scene in it, and I feel like a lot more people will want to read it, because a lot of people who do want to read it are quite hesitant because of this one scene, so that's the main thing that I'm talking about here. So next up I'm going to talk about Twilight by Stephenie Meyer. This book has a plethora of issues, and I'm only going to touch on a few of them here. So I enjoy the Twilight saga purely for entertainment purposes. I can definitely point out all of its flaws, and I'm sure that most Twilight fans will say the same. Even though we love Twilight as much as we do, we can definitely all tell that it's not perfect. The writing style feels very juvenile, and it feels like a teenage girl wrote it because she had a crush on some dude at her school. That's what it feels like. Also, I should probably point out there are some very problematic parts of this saga that have caused some controversy. So if you want to look into that, then go ahead, just Google Twilight controversy, you'll probably find some stuff on it. But that aspect of this series is very problematic, and I hope that we can all tell that it shouldn't really exist. It's also so cheesy. Like, this entire series is the cringiest thing I've ever read. In fact, with Eclipse, the third book, I actually tabbed it every single time something cringy happened. And from the amount of tabs I have in this book, it was cringy in a lot of places. But yeah, I can definitely tell that Twilight has its flaws. And even though I love it as much as I do, I can tell that it's not perfect by any means. So this next book, unless you're pretty close to me, you probably don't know that this is one of my favourite books. It's 1984 by George Orwell. This is the only classic on this list, and it is my favourite classic. So the only problem that I have with this book is chapter 9 of the second part, when you read exactly what Winston is reading. This is very similar to my only fault with Misery, where you just don't need to read it. I mean, actually, within 1984, you do need to read it, because you do need to know this information as background information to help you understand the dystopia that is George Orwell's 1984, but it's just very, very, very boring because you are reading a non-fiction work in a fiction work, and it's not a pleasant reading experience, but you do need to read it as background information to understand the rest of it. But that is really my only fault with this book. I adore 1984. So next I'm just going to talk about an author in general, and it is Cassandra Clare. Cassandra Clare is my second favourite author of all time, but I can definitely tell that within her books, especially her earlier works, there are some things that need to be pointed out as issues. So in City of Bones, I'm not going to say what's going on specifically if you have not read this book, but there's some incestuous vibes that are not very cool. But also there is so much insta-love, especially in City of Bones. You know immediately who the main character is going to fall in love with. The moment that they interact with each other for the first time, you know, that you can just tell who ends up with who. I feel like throughout the years, Cassandra Clare has definitely evolved as an author. So if you asked me to point out all of the issues in Chain of Gold or the Dark Artifices trilogy, I may not be able to point out many flaws, but within her earlier works, it does feel, in a similar way to Stephenie Meyer, but nowhere near as bad, it does feel quite juvenile within the writing style. So lastly, I'm going to talk about another author in general, and it's Sarah J Maas. Sarah J Maas is another one of my favourite authors, but there are some things that she does in her writing that kind of infuriate me. First of all, every single character in every single one of her books has to have a love interest, and that annoys me. Why are there no single people in any of her books? But as well as that, there's also some phrases that Sarah J Maas uses very often, and you may not really notice it, but if you really look at it, there are some phrases that she uses on a very regular basis, and it can get repetitive. But also I find with Sarah J Maas's books, especially with her earlier books, the first 200 pages or so of her books are very slow and very boring, but once you get past that, it does speed up a lot. But those are really the only problems I have with Sarah J Maas. That's going to be it for this video. I hope you've enjoyed listening to the things that I don't like in my favourite books, because I do think it is really, really important to identify the flaws in the things that we love. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a big fat thumbs up, and please consider subscribing for more bookish videos like these. All of my social media links are in the description below, and I will see you again for another video. Goodbye.